A stormy night tore through the city, a single father dragging a cart through the rain, his hand gripping that of his shivering 6-year-old daughter. Suddenly they saw a luxury car with a flat tire and a wealthy woman helpless in the storm. Out of compassion and his daughter's plea, he gave up his only night shift to fix her car and refused the money. Little did they know, the very next day that woman would return and turn their lives upside down. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The rain wasn't just falling on Atlanta that night, it was attacking it. Each drop hit the cracked pavement like a tiny fist, and the wind howled between the buildings with the fury of something that had been caged too long. Jamal Brooks pulled his threadbare jacket tighter around his shoulders and gripped the rusted handle of the shopping cart with white knuckles. His other hand held tight to 6-year-old Naomi's fingers, feeling how small they were, how fragile. "Daddy, my shoes are getting all squishy," Naomi said, her voice barely audible over the storm. She had to skip every few steps to keep up with his long strides, but she wasn't complaining. She never complained, not even when dinner was crackers and peanut butter again, not even when they had to sleep in the car. "I know, baby girl, we'll find somewhere dry soon." The lie rolled off his tongue easier than the truth. The truth was they had nowhere to go. The shelter was full, had been full for 3 days straight. The 24-hour diner kicked out anyone who looked homeless after midnight, and the $63 in his wallet wouldn't stretch to cover a motel room and food. The shopping cart's left wheel had started wobbling 2 blocks back, fighting him with every step. Inside, their life was reduced to essentials: 2 changes of clothes that still smelled like the laundromat's industrial detergent, Naomi's stuffed elephant Mr. Peanuts, and the red toolbox that used to mean everything when Jamal Brooks was still a mechanic people called when their engines made funny noises. That felt like another lifetime now. Before Peterson's auto repair closed down 8 months ago when old Jim couldn't find anyone to buy the business. Before the medical bills from Sarah's cancer treatment ate through their savings like acid. Before the eviction notice and the sleepless nights and the slow grinding realization that the American dream had sharp teeth, Naomi suddenly stopped walking and pointed at a massive puddle that had formed where a storm drain couldn't keep up with the rain. "Look, Daddy, it's like a lake." Before he could stop her, she broke free from his grip and jumped into the water with both feet. The splash soaked her legs up to her knees, but her laughter rang out clear and bright, cutting through the storm like sunshine through clouds. She spun around in the puddle, arms spread wide, her face tilted up to catch the rain. "Naomi, get out of there, you'll catch," the words died in his throat. When was the last time he'd heard her laugh like that? When was the last time he'd seen her find joy in anything? Here he was, 32 years old and carrying their entire life in a shopping cart, and his daughter was dancing in a puddle like it was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Something cracked inside his chest, right behind his ribs. Not his heart breaking, that had happened 2 years ago when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do for Sarah. This was different. This was shame and pride and love all twisted together into something that hurt to breathe around. "It's like dancing with the sky," Naomi called out, still spinning. Water droplets flew from her soaked hair like tiny diamonds. "Come dance with me, Daddy." He should have told her to get out, should have worried about pneumonia and wet clothes and the fact that they didn't have anywhere warm to dry off. Instead, he found himself smiling for the first time in weeks, even as his heart was breaking for the 100th time that month. "Maybe later, sweetheart. We need to find somewhere dry first." His phone buzzed in his pocket. The warehouse, Marcus, the night supervisor, wondering where the hell he was. The job paid $9 an hour, cash under the table, loading trucks until dawn. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. The only thing standing between them and complete destitution. But how could he leave Naomi alone to go to work? She was 6 years old. 6-year-olds needed their fathers, especially on nights when the world felt like it was ending. The phone buzzed again, then went silent. Another bridge burned. Another door slammed shut. "Daddy, your phone is making angry noises," Naomi said, wading out of the puddle with water squishing in her sneakers. "It's okay, baby, just work stuff." He scooped her up, feeling how light she'd gotten over the past few months. Too light. When had she last had a real meal? His stomach clenched with guilt that felt sharper than hunger. They passed a bus stop where an elderly woman sat hunched under a torn umbrella, her coat soaked through. She looked up as they approached, and Jamal saw recognition in her eyes, the look one drowning person gives another. "Evening," she called out, her voice rough from years of cigarettes or shouting at a world that wouldn't listen. "Y'all need somewhere dry." Jamal slowed down, feeling Naomi's wet hair against his neck. "Evening, we're managing, thank you. Church down on Auburn opens their doors when it storms like this. Pastor Williams don't turn nobody away. Charity," the word sat in his throat like broken glass. How many times had he swallowed his pride in the past year? How many food banks and soup kitchens and shelters had he stood in line for, hat in hand, pretending his daughter couldn't see the shame burning in his face? "We're fine," he said, knowing it wasn't true, knowing the woman could see it wasn't true, "but thank you kindly." She nodded like she understood. "Church'll be there if you change your mind. Rain like this, it brings out the good in folks." As they walked away, Naomi twisted in his arms to wave at the woman. "Bye, nice lady." Always polite, his daughter. Always kind. Where did she learn that? Not from this world that had knocked them down and kept kicking. The storm was getting worse, lightning split the sky like God's own photographer, and thunder rolled through the streets with the rumble of freight trains. Jamal's arms ached from carrying Naomi, from pushing the stubborn cart, from holding himself together when everything inside wanted to fall apart. "Daddy," Naomi said, pressing her face against his neck. "Are we lost?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Lost, yes, they were lost. He'd been walking these streets for 2 hours now, going nowhere, running from nothing and toward less. $63 in his wallet. No job to go to tomorrow. No idea what came next. "No baby," he said, because fathers weren't supposed to be lost. Fathers were supposed to have plans and backup plans and ways to keep their children safe and warm. "We're just taking the long way home." Where is home now? Home used to be the apartment on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive with the kitchen window that caught the morning sun and the bedroom where he'd read her stories every night. Home was Saturday morning pancakes and Sunday afternoon cartoons and the life they'd built after Sarah died, fragile as tissue paper but theirs. "Home is wherever we're together," he said, and meant it. It was the only truth he had left that didn't taste like ashes. Thunder crashed overhead, and Naomi pressed closer to him. Her trust was absolute, unwavering, terrifying. She believed he could carry them both through anything. The weight of that faith was heavier than her small body, more precious than anything in the shopping cart. They turned onto Peachtree Street, where the expensive restaurants glowed warm and inviting behind rain-streaked windows. People in suits hurried past under umbrellas that probably cost more than Jamal made in a week, their problems different from his, but just as real to them. Nobody looked at the man with the shopping cart and the little girl. They were invisible here, which was fine. Invisible was easier than being seen as a cautionary tale. Easier than reading pity or judgment or fear in strangers' eyes. "Daddy," Naomi whispered, her voice getting sleepy. "I'm cold." He felt her shivering against him, and knew he had to make a choice. Pride or practicality. The man he used to be or the father he needed to be now. The church the old woman had mentioned, or keep walking until hypothermia made the choice for him. "I know, sweetheart. Let's go find Pastor Williams." The Lexus sat under the flickering streetlight, like a piece of jewelry someone had dropped in the gutter. Even through the rain, even with water streaming down its silver sides, the car radiated the kind of perfection that money could buy, the kind Jamal used to admire in magazines back when he thought hard work and decent character were enough to build a life on. Victoria Kane stood beside the driver's door, her phone pressed to her ear, her other hand fighting to keep an umbrella steady against the wind. From 50 feet away, Jamal could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept shifting her weight from foot to foot. "No, I cannot wait until morning," she was saying, her voice carrying over the storm with the authority of someone accustomed to getting her way. "I have a board meeting at 7 a.m. that will determine the future of 3 manufacturing plants. This is completely unacceptable." Flat tire. Jamal could see it from here, the front passenger side sitting low, the expensive rim kissing the wet asphalt. He'd changed thousands of tires over the years, could probably do it blindfolded by now. His hand still remembered the feel of lug nuts and the weight of a tire iron, even though it had been months since he'd worked on anything more complex than keeping their ancient Honda Civic running on prayers and duct tape. "Keep walking," a voice in his head whispered. "Not your problem. You got enough troubles of your own." But Naomi had gone still in his arms, staring at the woman with the kind of wide-eyed concern that saw straight through to the heart of things. "She looks scared, Daddy." Scared. That wasn't the word he would have used. Frustrated, maybe. Angry, definitely. Rich people didn't get scared, they got inconvenienced. But looking closer he could see what Naomi meant. Beneath the expensive coat and the practiced composure, Victoria Kane was gripping her phone like a lifeline, and her free hand was trembling. "She's probably fine, baby. Rich folks have people to call for this kind of thing. But what if she doesn't?" Victoria ended her call with what sounded like a string of curses that would have made the mechanics at Peterson's blush. She stared at her phone for a moment, then at the flat tire, then up at the storm clouds like she was personally offended by the weather. "Daddy," Naomi said, tugging at his jacket. "We should help her." "Sweetheart, we can't." "Why not?" "Because we're homeless," he wanted to say. "Because we're soaking wet and desperate, and she's probably got a purse worth more than we'll see in 6 months. Because people like her don't want help from people like us. Because the last thing I need tonight is some rich woman calling the cops on the homeless man who approached her broken-down car." But he couldn't say any of that to his 6-year-old daughter, who still believed the world was a place where people helped each other simply because it was the right thing to do. His phone buzzed again. The warehouse. The job he was supposed to be at right now, the $9 an hour lifeline that was slipping through his fingers with every minute he stood here in the rain. "Please, Daddy." Naomi's voice was small but determined. "Remember what you told me about being kind." Had he told her that? Maybe back when he still believed kindness mattered, before life had taught him that good intentions were a luxury he couldn't afford. But looking at his daughter's face, seeing the absolute certainty in her dark eyes that helping was the only option, he felt something stir in his chest. Something he'd thought the past year had killed. "Stay close to me," he said, setting her down next to the shopping cart. "Don't go anywhere. I'm coming with you. Naomi, I'm coming with you." She slipped her small hand into his, and suddenly he didn't have the heart to argue. They approached the Lexus slowly, like they were walking up to a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Victoria noticed them when they were about 10 feet away. Her shoulders tensed, and her grip tightened on her phone. Her eyes flicked from Jamal to Naomi to the shopping cart full of everything they owned, and he could see her mental calculations: homeless man, small child, approaching in the dark and rain, threat assessment, exit strategies. "Ma'am," Jamal said, stopping at what he hoped was a respectful distance. "Looks like you've got some car trouble." "I've already called for assistance," Victoria said quickly, too quickly. "They're on their way." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Whatever conversation she'd just had clearly not gone the way she'd hoped. "Flat tires a pain in weather like this," Jamal said, nodding toward the passenger side. He kept his voice calm, non-threatening, the way he'd learned to talk to skittish customers back when he was still fixing cars for a living. "Yes, well," Victoria glanced around nervously. "I'm sure someone will be here soon." The rain picked up again, turning the world into a watercolor painting left out in the storm. Victoria's umbrella was losing its fight with the wind, and water was starting to soak through her expensive shoes. "My daddy fixes cars," Naomi announced cheerfully, apparently immune to the tension crackling between the adults. "He's really good at it. He can fix anything." "Used to fix cars," Jamal corrected gently. "Haven't done much of that lately." Victoria looked down at Naomi, and something in her expression shifted. Maybe it was the sight of a small child standing in the rain without complaint, or maybe it was the way Naomi smiled up at her with complete trust. Whatever it was, the defensive wall she'd thrown up started to crack. "Could you?" Victoria asked, and for the first time her voice wavered. "Fix it, I mean. I have a meeting tomorrow that I absolutely cannot miss, and the towing company just told me they won't be here until after midnight, if at all." Jamal looked at the car, then back at Victoria. Beneath the expensive makeup that was starting to run in the rain, beneath the designer clothes and practiced authority, he saw something he recognized. Desperation. The kind that made you ask strangers for help because you were out of other options. "I could take a look," he heard himself say. "Can't promise anything, but I could take a look." Relief flooded Victoria's face so quickly it was almost embarrassing to witness. "Thank you, God, thank you. I can pay you, of course. Whatever you think is fair. Let's see if I can actually fix it first." Jamal walked back to the shopping cart and pulled out his toolbox, red metal, dented from years of use, filled with tools that used to be his livelihood. His hands shook slightly as he opened it, whether from cold or nerves or the weight of muscle memory, he couldn't tell. The car's factory jack was in the trunk, buried under shopping bags from stores that didn't bother putting price tags on their merchandise because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. As Jamal set up the jack, he was acutely aware of Victoria watching his every move, probably wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake trusting a homeless man with her car. The rain made everything harder. The tools slipped in his wet hands and water ran down his arms inside his sleeves. But there was something deeply familiar about the work, something that felt like coming home after a long, painful exile. His hands remembered what to do, even when his mind was screaming about all the ways this could go wrong. Naomi stationed herself beside him with their broken umbrella, trying to keep the worst of the rain off his head, even though she was getting soaked in the process. Victoria hovered nearby, phone in hand, watching the storm like she could intimidate it into stopping. "You do this for a living?" Victoria asked after a while, having to raise her voice over the wind. "Used to," Jamal said, wrestling with a lug nut that didn't want to cooperate. "Worked at Peterson's auto repair until it closed down." "I'm sorry." He glanced up at her, water dripping from his hair. "Economy's rough all over," it was the polite response, the one that didn't invite follow-up questions about medical bills and eviction notices and all the small disasters that added up to complete catastrophe. Victoria seemed to sense there was more to the story, but she didn't push. The spare tire was one of those emergency donuts that looked like it belonged on a bicycle, a temporary solution at best, but it would hold long enough to get her to a tire shop, long enough to make it to her meeting tomorrow. "This won't last long," Jamal said, tightening the lug nuts with practiced efficiency. "You'll need to get a proper tire as soon as possible. Don't drive it hard, and don't go more than 50 miles on this thing." "Of course," Victoria said. "I understand. Thank you so much. Really, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't." She trailed off, looking at them. The man in the threadbare jacket, the little girl holding a broken umbrella like it was made of gold, the shopping cart that held a life, reduced to its absolute essentials. "If you hadn't come along," she finished quietly. Jamal lowered the jack and watched the car settle onto its temporary tire. His phone had stopped buzzing. The warehouse job was definitely gone now, along with any chance of scraping together enough money for a motel room tonight. But looking at the relief on Victoria's face, seeing Naomi beam with pride at her daddy's handiwork, he found he didn't regret it as much as he probably should have. "All set," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Drive careful now. These little tires don't handle worth a damn in the rain." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like several $100s in cash. "Please," she said, holding out the money, "you've saved my entire week. Let me pay you for this." Jamal stared at the bills. Enough for a motel room with heat and hot water. Enough for real food instead of vending machine sandwiches. Enough to buy Naomi dry clothes and maybe even a toy to replace the ones they'd lost when they got evicted. His pride wrestled with his practical side, and for a long moment he wasn't sure which would win. Then Naomi slipped her cold wet hand into his, and he remembered what kind of man he wanted to be for her. What kind of example he wanted to set, especially when it cost more than he could afford. "No ma'am," he said, gently pushing her hand away. "We were glad to help." Victoria stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "Are you sure? I mean you clearly." She stopped herself before she could finish the sentence, but they both knew what she'd been about to say. "I'm sure," Jamal said. "You drive safe now. Get that tire replaced first thing tomorrow." He turned to go, gathering up his tools and taking Naomi's hand. Behind them he heard Victoria get into her car, heard the engine turn over with the smooth reliability that money could buy. Some problems, at least, were easy to solve when you had the right resources. "Wait," Victoria called out. Jamal turned back. She had rolled down her window, rain immediately beginning to spatter the leather interior. "At least let me give you a ride somewhere. It's the least I can do." Jamal looked at the Lexus with its cream-colored seats and that new car smell, then at their shopping cart full of damp belongings. He imagined trying to fit their life into her pristine back seat, imagined the awkward silence as she drove them to whatever shelter would take them in. "Thank you," he said, "but we're good walking." Victoria looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have told her not to push. "Thank you again," she said, instead. "I mean it, I won't forget this." She drove away into the storm, her taillights disappearing around the corner like red stars winking out. Jamal stood there for a moment, watching the space where she'd been, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the first right choice he'd made in months. "You did good, Daddy," Naomi said, squeezing his hand. "That was really nice of you." "Yeah, baby," he said, looking down at her rain-soaked face. "I guess it was." They started walking again, into the storm, into the uncertain night. But somehow, despite everything, Jamal felt lighter than he had in weeks, like maybe there was still something left in him worth saving after all. The warehouse parking lot was empty except for a few cars huddled under the security lights like animals seeking shelter. Jamal stood at the chain-link fence, water dripping from his hair, and watched Marcus's pickup truck disappear into the night. 11:47 p.m. The shift had started at 11. In Marcus's world, being 47 minutes late was the same as not showing up at all. "Is that where you work, Daddy?" Naomi asked, pressing her face against the fence. The loading docks were lit up bright as day, and he could see other men moving boxes, doing the job he was supposed to be doing right now. "Used to work," he said, pulling out his phone to check the damage. 4 missed calls from Marcus. 3 text messages that probably said the same thing: "Don't bother coming in tomorrow." Or ever. They found shelter in a 24-hour laundromat, 6 blocks away, a fluorescent-lit purgatory that smelled like industrial detergent and broken dreams. A few other people sat in the plastic chairs, some washing clothes, others just trying to stay warm and dry. Nobody made eye contact. In places like this, minding your own business was a survival skill. Jamal settled Naomi into a chair near the back and draped his jacket around her shoulders. She was shivering now, her lips taking on a blue tinge that made his chest tight with guilt and fear. "I'm going to get us something warm," he said. "Don't move, okay?" The vending machine offered stale sandwiches for $3 each and coffee that looked like it had been brewing since the Clinton administration. Jamal fed $6 into the machine and watched their emergency fund shrink by another 10%. When he got back, Naomi was talking quietly to a young woman who'd moved her laundry basket closer to where they were sitting. Her name tag read Carmen, and she had the hollow-eyed look of someone working multiple jobs just to stay afloat. "Your little girl says you helped someone with car trouble tonight," Carmen was saying, folding a tiny pink dress with careful precision. "That was real good of you." "Just did what anyone would do," Jamal said, unwrapping one of the sandwiches and handing half to Naomi. The bread was stale, and the meat was questionable, but it was warm and it was food. "Not everyone would stop in weather like this," Carmen said. "Especially not when they got their own troubles to worry about." She gestured toward their shopping cart with her chin, and Jamal realized how obvious their situation must be. The cart itself, their wet clothes, the way he'd counted out exact change for the sandwiches, it all painted a picture that anyone could read. "Sometimes you do what you can," he said simply. Carmen nodded like she understood. "I work nights at the Marriott downtown. Housekeeping, saw that fancy car broken down when I was waiting for the bus earlier, was wondering who'd be crazy enough to help a stranger in a storm like this." She smoothed out a wrinkle in the dress, her movements practiced and methodical. "My grandmother used to say kindness always comes back to you. Maybe not right away, maybe not how you expect, but it comes back." Jamal wanted to believe that. Wanted to think that tonight's choice would somehow lead to something better, that the universe kept some kind of cosmic ledger and good deeds were eventually rewarded, but he'd been kind before, had helped neighbors fix their cars for free, had given his last $20 to families that needed it more, had worked overtime to help Jim Peterson when business was slow, and where had it gotten him? Sitting in a laundromat, at midnight, feeding his daughter vending machine sandwiches while she shivered in wet clothes. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. This is Victoria Kane. I wanted to thank you again for your help tonight. I hope you and your daughter found somewhere safe and warm. Jamal stared at the message. How had she gotten his number? Then he remembered introducing himself when he'd offered to help. Rich people had ways of finding information that regular folks didn't, private investigators, personal assistants, connections that opened doors and provided answers. He started to type a response, then stopped. What was there to say? That they were fine when they clearly weren't, that everything was working out when he just lost their only source of income, that helping her had been worth it when he wasn't sure it had been. Good news? Carmen asked, noticing him staring at his phone. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Naomi had finished her sandwich and was leaning against his side, her eyelids heavy with exhaustion. Around them, the laundromat hummed with the sound of washing machines and the quiet desperation of people who had nowhere else to go. His phone buzzed again. I've been thinking about what you did tonight. Would you be interested in meeting for coffee tomorrow? I might have something that would interest you. Jamal read the message twice, then showed it to Carmen, who whistled low under her breath. Well, I'll be damned, she said. Grandma was right after all. It's probably nothing, Jamal said, but his heart was beating faster despite his attempts to stay realistic. People say things when they're grateful. Doesn't mean they follow through. Only one way to find out, Carmen said, gathering up her laundry. What have you got to lose? Everything, Jamal thought. Hope was dangerous when you were barely hanging on. Hope made you believe in possibilities that could shatter you when they didn't work out. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. But looking at Naomi, seeing the way her face had lit up when she'd seen the message, he realized he didn't have a choice. He'd lost his job tonight, but maybe, just maybe, he'd found something else. Something that might matter more. Tomorrow sounds good, he texted back. Thank you. The response came almost immediately, 11 a.m. at the Starbucks on Peachtree, and Mr. Brooks. Bring your daughter. I'd like to meet her properly. Jamal showed the message to Naomi, who clapped her hands together with delight. She wants to meet me. Maybe she'll be our friend. Maybe, baby, Jamal said, pulling her close. Maybe she will. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, but inside the laundromat, something was stirring that felt like the beginning of hope. And for the first time in months, Jamal Brooks allowed himself to believe that tomorrow might be different from today. Victoria Kane sat in her car for 25 minutes after Jamal Brooks and his daughter disappeared into the storm. The engine purred quietly, the heated seats warming her back, but she couldn't shake the chill that had nothing to do with the weather. When was the last time someone had refused her money? She honestly couldn't remember. In her world, everything had a price, usually negotiable upward. Restaurant reservations, private school admissions, expedited permits, judicial favor. Money opened doors that stayed locked for other people. Money solved problems before they became problems. But Jamal Brooks had looked at her cash like it was radioactive. Like taking it would have cost him something more valuable than what she was offering. Victoria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Miranda's number. Her assistant answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Mrs. Kane, is everything all right? I need you to research someone for me. Victoria said. Jamal Brooks, African-American male, early 30s, has a daughter about 6 years old, used to work at an auto repair shop that closed down. This is rather unusual. May I ask? Just do it. I need everything you can find by tomorrow morning. Employment history, family situation, current address if possible. After hanging up, Victoria drove slowly through the empty streets, taking the long way home to her high-rise condominium in Buckhead. The storm was finally breaking,
but she found herself looking at every bus stop, every doorway, wondering where people like Jamal and his daughter went when they needed shelter.
She'd grown up in a world where poverty was an abstraction, something that happened to other people in other places, something you donated money to at charity galas while wearing jewelry worth more than most people made in a year. She'd never had to think about where she'd sleep if she didn't have a home, what she'd eat if she didn't have money, how she'd keep her child warm if she couldn't pay for heat. Tonight, for the first time in her privileged life, she'd gotten a glimpse of what that uncertainty might feel like. Standing in the rain with a broken car and no immediate solution, she'd tasted just a drop of the helplessness that some people lived with every day. And when help had come, it hadn't come from her platinum-level roadside assistance or her network of influential contacts. It had come from a man who clearly had nothing to spare but had given his time and expertise anyway, then refused to let her pay him for it. Victoria's penthouse offered a panoramic view of Atlanta's skyline, each light representing someone's life, someone's dreams, someone's struggles. She poured herself a glass of wine, a bottle that cost more than Jamal probably made in a week, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the streets where he and his daughter were still out there somewhere in the night. Her phone rang. Miranda calling back with preliminary information. "His name is Jamal Brooks," her assistant said, reading from what sounded like handwritten notes. 32 years old, widowed, one daughter named Naomi. Used to work at Peterson's Auto Repair on Boulevard until it closed 8 months ago. No current employment on record. Last known address was an apartment complex that shows an eviction notice from 3 months ago. Victoria closed her eyes. What about his wife, Sarah Brooks, deceased 2 years ago? Breast cancer. The medical records I could access show extensive treatment at Grady Hospital. No life insurance payout listed. Looks like the medical bills exceeded their coverage by a significant margin. The wine turned to ash in Victoria's mouth. She knew that story, had heard variations of it at board meetings for the hospital foundation she chaired. Medical bankruptcy, middle-class families destroyed by illnesses that insurance didn't fully cover, by treatments that cost more than houses, by a healthcare system that treated human suffering as a profit center. "Keep looking," she said. "I want to know everything." After Miranda hung up, Victoria sat in her leather chair and thought about the man who'd refused her money. She'd assumed it was simple masculine pride, the inability to accept help, especially from a woman. But maybe it was something deeper than that. Maybe he'd understood that taking her money would have changed what he'd done, would have transformed an act of kindness into a transaction, a moment of human connection into just another business deal. In her world everything was transactional. But in his world, where he had so little that every choice mattered, maybe some things were still sacred. Victoria picked up her phone again and scrolled through her contacts until she found David Chen, the general manager of her East Atlanta manufacturing plant. "David, it's Victoria. I know it's late, but I need you to do something for me." "Of course, Mrs. Kane. What do you need?" "I need you to create a job opening. Head of maintenance. Someone who can manage a team, handle complex repairs, work with minimal supervision." There was a pause. "We already have a maintenance supervisor." "Not anymore. Promote him to something else, transfer him, give him a raise. I don't care. I need that position open by Monday morning." "May I ask why?" Victoria looked out at the city lights, thinking about a man who'd given up his job to help a stranger, about a little girl who'd held a broken umbrella over her father's head like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the smart thing to do. The Starbucks on Peachtree Street buzzed with the energy of people who had places to be and money to spend. Victoria Kane sat at a corner table, checking her phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, wondering if she'd made a mistake. The manila folder beside her coffee contained everything her private investigator had been able to find about Jamal Brooks, and none of it made for easy reading. Born in Montgomery, Alabama, moved to Atlanta at 18 for technical school. Married Sarah Williams when he was 21, a nursing student at Emory, who'd grown up in the same neighborhood where poverty was a fact of life, not an abstraction. Then the slow-motion disaster had begun. Sarah's cancer diagnosis when Naomi was 2, aggressive chemotherapy that insurance covered in part, leaving them with crushing debt. Jamal working double shifts at Peterson's garage while trying to care for his sick wife and toddler daughter. Sarah's death 2 years ago, followed by medical bills that consumed their savings, their credit, their future. Peterson's closing 8 months later when the old man couldn't find a buyer. Jamal scrambling for work, construction jobs that lasted weeks, delivery driving until their car broke down, finally the night shifts at a warehouse that barely paid enough to keep them housed. Until last night, when helping a stranger had cost him even that. Victoria looked up as the door chimed, and her breath caught in her throat. In daylight, away from the storm, Jamal Brooks looked even thinner than she'd remembered. His shirt was clean but frayed at the cuffs, his pants pressed but worn at the knees. He'd tried to make himself presentable, but there was no hiding the weight he'd lost, the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. Naomi held his hand, wearing a dress that had been carefully mended in several places. Her hair was neatly braided, and she looked around the coffee shop with wide, curious eyes. Victoria stood as they approached, and Jamal's posture went rigid. She could see him calculating the cost of everything around them. The expensive coffee, the casual luxury that filled every corner of this place, the unbridgeable gap between her world and his. "Mr. Brooks," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Ma'am," he replied, his grip firm but brief. "This is my daughter Naomi." Naomi stepped forward and executed a small curtsy that was both charming and heartbreaking. "It's nice to meet you properly, Miss Victoria. Thank you for wanting to be our friend." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. When was the last time someone had wanted to be her friend without wanting something in return? "It's very nice to meet you too, Naomi. Would you like something to drink? Hot chocolate maybe? Can I, Daddy?" Naomi looked up at Jamal with hopeful eyes. Victoria saw him hesitate, probably calculating the cost, probably wondering if accepting even a cup of hot chocolate would put him in her debt somehow. "Of course, baby." They found seats at Victoria's table, and she noticed how Jamal positioned himself between his daughter and the room, like he was ready to shield her from whatever might come next. The protective instinct was so raw, so immediate, that it made Victoria's throat tight. "I did some research after last night," she said, sliding the manila folder aside. "I hope you don't mind." Jamal's jaw tightened. "What kind of research?" "The kind that tells me you were the head mechanic at Peterson's Auto Repair for 7 years. The kind that shows you could diagnose engine problems that stumped mechanics with twice your experience. The kind that explains why you're one of the best candidates I've ever seen for a position I need to fill." "What position?" Victoria leaned forward, choosing her words carefully. "I own 7 manufacturing plants across the Southeast. The East Atlanta facility produces precision automotive components for major manufacturers. We need a head maintenance supervisor, someone who understands complex machinery, can manage a team, solve problems under pressure." She watched understanding dawn in Jamal's eyes, watched him try not to hope too hard. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a career. $65,000 to start. Full benefits, health insurance that actually covers what it's supposed to cover. 2 weeks paid vacation, sick leave, retirement contributions." Naomi gasped audibly. "Daddy, that's more money than we've ever had." Jamal's face had gone very still. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Because you're qualified. Because I need someone I can trust. Because last night you did something decent when you didn't have to, and that tells me everything I need to know about your character." "This is charity," Jamal said, shaking his head. "You're offering me this job because you feel sorry for me." The accusation hung between them like a challenge. Victoria could have let him believe it, could have taken the easy path and pretended this was just about sympathy. Instead she pulled out her phone and showed him photos from the East Atlanta plant. "These machines produce transmission components that have to be accurate to within thousandths of an inch," she said. "When they break down, every hour of downtime costs us thousands of dollars. The last 3 people I hired for this position couldn't handle the pressure. One quit after 2 weeks, one couldn't diagnose problems fast enough, and one managed to cause more problems than he solved." She put the phone away and looked directly into his eyes. "I'm not offering you charity, Mr. Brooks. I'm offering you a job that needs doing, and I believe you're the man who can do it. If I'm wrong, I'll fire you. If I'm right, you'll have earned every penny." Jamal stared at her for a long moment, and she could see him wrestling with pride and desperation, hope and disbelief. Finally he spoke. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Show up Monday morning at 7 a.m., ask for David Chen, he's the general manager. He'll be expecting you. And if I can't do the job, then you can't do the job. But somehow I don't think that's going to be a problem." Victoria stood to leave, then turned back. Naomi was tugging on her father's sleeve, whispering something urgent in his ear. When she looked up at Victoria, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Miss Victoria," Naomi said in a small voice, "are you really going to help my daddy?" The question was so innocent, so full of desperate hope, that Victoria had to clear her throat before she could answer. "I think your daddy is going to help me, sweetheart. But yes, I'm really going to try." As she walked away, Victoria heard Naomi's excited chatter and Jamal's quiet responses, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to hide. At the door she turned back one more time and saw them hugging, a father and daughter who'd been handed a lifeline when they'd almost given up hope. For the first time in years, Victoria Kane felt like she'd done something that mattered. Jamal stared at Victoria Kane's business card until the letters started to blur. Victoria Kane, Chief Executive Officer, Kane Industries. He'd read it so many times the words had lost all meaning, but he couldn't stop looking at it, couldn't stop trying to convince himself it was real. Naomi had fallen asleep on their motel bed, a real bed with clean sheets, paid for with the $20 Victoria had insisted on giving them for lunch. She clutched Mr. Peanuts to her chest, and for the first time in months, she looked peaceful instead of worried. $65,000 a year. The number kept echoing in his head like a prayer he was afraid to believe in. It was more money than he'd ever made, more than he'd dreamed of making back when dreams felt possible instead of dangerous. It was health insurance for Naomi, regular meals, maybe even a real apartment with 2 bedrooms. But it was also impossible. Women like Victoria Kane didn't just hand out jobs to men like him. There had to be an angle, had to be something he wasn't seeing. Maybe she was the kind of wealthy woman who collected charity cases, who got a thrill from playing savior to the deserving poor. Maybe this was all some elaborate tax write-off, or maybe, and this thought terrified him more than the others, maybe she was telling the truth. His phone buzzed, text message from a number he now recognized. "The offer stands until Sunday night. After that, I'll need to look elsewhere. Think about your daughter, VK. Think about your daughter." Like he thought about anything else. Like every decision he'd made for the past 2 years hadn't been about Naomi, about trying to give her some semblance of a normal childhood while their world fell apart around them. He walked to the motel window and looked down at the parking lot, where kids were riding bikes around the potholes, their laughter echoing off the concrete. This was Naomi's world now, a place where childhood happened in spite of circumstances, not because of them. Was it fair to keep her here because of his pride? Because he was afraid of taking a chance that might not work out? His phone rang, unknown number, but he was starting to recognize the pattern. "Hello, Mr. Brooks, this is David Chen from Kane Industries. Mrs. Kane asked me to call you about the maintenance supervisor position." Jamal's grip tightened on the phone. "Yes, sir. I have to be honest, when she told me she'd found someone, I was skeptical. We've been looking for the right person for 6 months. Good mechanics are hard to find, and great ones are even rarer. I appreciate that, sir. But then she showed me your background, Peterson's Auto Repair. I knew Jim Peterson. Good man, ran a quality shop. He spoke very highly of you when I called him this morning." The words hit Jamal like a physical blow. Peterson remembered him, still vouched for him after all this time, after all the months of silence and shame. "Jim taught me everything I know about engines," Jamal said, his voice thick. "He also told me about your situation, about your wife, about losing the shop. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry it's been so hard since then." There was a pause, and Jamal could hear machinery humming in the background, the sound of a working factory, of people with steady jobs and regular paychecks. "Look," David continued, "I'll be straight with you. This isn't charity. Mrs. Kane doesn't do charity when it comes to business. She's offering you this job because she thinks you can do it, and because I need someone who can keep our equipment running at peak efficiency." What exactly would the job involve? "We manufacture precision automotive parts, complex machinery, some of it temperamental. The maintenance supervisor oversees a team of 4 technicians, handles the most complex repairs personally, and works with production supervisors to minimize downtime.
It sounded like the kind of work Jamal had always been good at, work that required not just technical knowledge but intuition, the ability to listen to a machine and understand what it was trying to tell you. "Can I ask you something, Mr. Chen?" "Of course. Why hasn't this position been filled already? 6 months is a long time to go without proper supervision." David chuckled ruefully. "Fair question. Honestly, we've had 3 people in the job since it opened up. One couldn't handle the technical demands, one couldn't manage the team effectively, and one decided our standards were too high and walked out without notice. What makes you think I'd be different?" "Because Mrs. Kane thinks you'd be different. And in the 5 years I've worked for her, I've learned to trust her judgment about people." After David hung up, Jamal sat in the motel's single chair and watched Naomi sleep. She was dreaming about something pleasant, her face was relaxed, and every few minutes she'd make a small sound that might have been laughter. What would her dreams be like if they lived in a real apartment? If she had her own room, her own bed, toys that weren't rescued from thrift stores? If she went to a school where the teachers had enough supplies and the buildings weren't falling apart? What would her dreams be like if her father was the kind of man who believed in possibilities instead of just surviving from one day to the next? His phone buzzed again. Another call, another unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Brooks, this is Victoria Kane. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No ma'am, not at all." "Good, I wanted to follow up on our conversation this morning. David tells me he spoke with you about the specifics of the position." "Yes ma'am, he did. And what are your thoughts?" Jamal looked around the motel room at the water-stained ceiling, at the heater that wheezed like an old man, at his daughter sleeping in clothes that had been washed too many times. What were his thoughts? That this felt too good to be true. That people like him didn't get chances like this. That he was terrified of hoping too hard and having it all fall apart again. "It sounds like a good opportunity," he said carefully. "But, no buts ma'am, it sounds like a very good opportunity." There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice was gentler somehow. "Jamal, can I be frank with you?" "Yes ma'am. In my world people do nice things because they want something in return. They're angling for a deal, or trying to impress me, or hoping I'll remember them when they need a favor. It's all transactional." "Okay, but you weren't angling for anything last night. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Even though it cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. That kind of character is rare, and it's exactly what I need in someone I'm going to trust with a multi-million-dollar operation." Naomi stirred on the bed, mumbling something about ice cream and elephants. Jamal reached over and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. "Mrs. Kane," he said quietly, "if I take this job, I need you to know something. I'm going to work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I'm going to show up early and stay late, and make sure every machine in that plant runs like clockwork. Not because I owe you, but because that's who I am." "I know," Victoria said. "That's exactly why I'm offering it to you." After she hung up, Jamal walked back to the window. The kids were still playing in the parking lot, but the light was different now, golden instead of gray, like maybe the sun was finally going to break through the clouds that had been hanging over his life for too long. He looked at Victoria Kane's business card one more time, then tucked it carefully into his wallet next to the photo of Sarah he always carried. His wife smiled back at him from the worn picture, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice. "Take the chance, Jamal," she would have said. "Take it for Naomi, take it for all of us." Monday morning was still 2 days away. 2 days to imagine all the ways this could go wrong, all the reasons he wasn't qualified, all the possibilities for disappointment, or 2 days to imagine what it would feel like to hope again. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Jamal Brooks chose hope. Monday morning arrived crisp and bright, like Atlanta was putting on its best face for new beginnings. Jamal stood outside the Kane Industries East Atlanta plant at 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes early because his grandmother had always said that on time was late, and late was fired. The building stretched out before him like something from another world, 3 stories of modern brick and steel, with loading docks humming with activity and workers streaming through the employee entrance carrying lunch boxes and thermoses. Real jobs, real paychecks, real lives. Jamal adjusted his tie, the same black one he'd worn to Sarah's funeral, the only one he owned, and walked through the front entrance like he belonged there. The receptionist looked up from her computer with a smile that seemed genuine. "You must be Mr. Brooks. I'm Janet. Mr. Chen is expecting you." She led him through hallways lined with framed certificates and photos of automotive parts that looked like pieces of art. The air thrummed with the sound of machinery, a sound Jamal hadn't realized he'd missed until it filled his ears again. David Chen was younger than Jamal had expected, maybe 35, with the efficient energy of someone who'd earned his position through competence rather than connections. His office overlooked the factory floor, where workers in hard hats moved between massive machines with the choreographed precision of a ballet. "Jamal," David said, standing to shake hands, "good to finally meet you in person. Coffee, please." David poured from a machine that probably cost more than Jamal's monthly rent used to be. "How are you feeling?" "First day nerves." "Some," Jamal admitted, accepting the steaming mug. "It's been a while since I worked in a place like this. You'll find we do things differently here. Mrs. Kane has high standards, but she also believes in taking care of people who take care of business." David handed him a file folder. "Employment, paperwork, benefits information, organizational chart. You'll be overseeing 4 technicians: Tom Rodriguez, Mike Patterson, Lisa Kim and Ethan Cole, any of them likely to have issues with the change in leadership." It was a delicate way of asking what they both knew he was asking. David paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Tom and Mike are solid, been here 3 years, know their jobs, no drama. Lisa's new, 6 months, but she's sharp and eager to learn." David set down his cup. "Ethan's been here longest, almost 5 years. Good mechanic, knows these machines better than anyone. But he applied for the supervisor position when it opened up, and didn't get it. He's been running things informally while we searched, and I think he expected the job to become permanent." Jamal nodded. He'd walked into this situation before, workplace politics mixed with wounded pride and racial tension that nobody wanted to acknowledge but everybody felt. "How do you want me to handle it?" "Carefully but firmly. Ethan's a good worker, but he needs to understand that you're his supervisor now, not his peer. Earn his respect through competence, not authority." They walked down to the factory floor, where the morning shift was in full swing. The noise was tremendous, metal on metal, hydraulic presses cycling, conveyor belts carrying parts from station to station. But it was organized chaos, purposeful and productive. "This is our main production line," David shouted over the din. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day except Sundays. These machines produce transmission components for 5 different auto manufacturers. When they're running, we make money. When they're not, we lose money fast," Jamal finished. "Exactly." They made their way to the maintenance bay, a surprisingly clean and well-organized area with proper tool storage and adequate workspace. 4 people in coveralls were gathered around a partially disassembled machine, their heads bent over some internal component, like surgeons performing an operation. "Team," David called out. "Come meet your new supervisor." 3 of them looked up immediately with polite interest. The 4th, a white man in his 40s with graying temples and the permanent oil stains of a career mechanic, kept working. "Tom Rodriguez," said a stocky Hispanic man extending a calloused hand. "Welcome aboard, boss." "Mike Patterson," added a thin black man with wire-rimmed glasses and an easy smile. "Glad to have some proper supervision again. We've been flying blind for months." "Lisa Kim," said a young Asian woman who looked like she was barely out of college but had the confident bearing of someone who knew her business. "I've heard good things about your work at Peterson's." They all looked expectantly at the 4th member of the team, who finally straightened up and turned around. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of permanent scowl that came from years of hard work and harder disappointments. "Ethan Cole," he said flatly, not offering his hand. "I guess you're the new boss." The tension was immediate and thick enough to cut with a knife. Tom and Mike exchanged uncomfortable glances while Lisa suddenly found her work boots fascinating. "That's right," Jamal said evenly, meeting Ethan's stare without flinching. "Looking forward to working with all of you." "Uh-huh." Ethan wiped his hands on a rag that was already filthy. "So what's your plan? Come in here and change everything because you know better than people who've been keeping this place running." David started to intervene, but Jamal held up a hand. This was his team now, his challenge to handle. "My plan," Jamal said, is to learn how things work here before I suggest any changes. You've been keeping this place running without a supervisor for 6 months. That tells me you know your jobs better than I do right now. Ethan's scowl softened slightly, but his posture remained defensive. Damn right we do. Good. So why don't you show me what you're working on, and we can take it from there. The machine they'd been repairing was a hydraulic press used to shape transmission housings, a beast of steel and precision that probably cost more than most people's houses. According to Tom, it had been making irregular noises for 2 weeks before they'd finally shut it down that morning when the noise became impossible to ignore. We've pulled the main housing and checked all the obvious culprits, Lisa said, consulting a clipboard covered with technical notes written in neat handwriting. Hydraulic fluid levels are good, pressure readings are normal, but there's definitely something wrong in the pump assembly. Jamal crouched down next to the machine and listened. Even powered down, he could hear the subtle sounds of metal under stress, the tiny vibrations that spoke of worn bearings or misaligned components. It was like listening to a heartbeat and hearing the irregularities that warned of bigger problems to come. How long has this machine been in service? He asked. 8 years, Ethan said, and there was a defensive edge to his voice. But it's been maintained properly. I made sure of that. Jamal ignored the challenge in Ethan's tone, and ran his hands over the pump housing, feeling for heat spots or vibration patterns that might tell him what was going on inside. Can you start it up, just for a few seconds, so I can hear it run? Ethan looked skeptical but nodded to Mike, who hit the power switch. The machine rumbled to life with a sound like controlled thunder, and immediately Jamal could hear what was wrong. It was subtle, a rhythmic clicking buried beneath the normal operating noise, but unmistakable once you knew what to listen for. Shut it down, he said after 30 seconds. The factory floor went quiet around them. Other workers had begun to gather, drawn by curiosity and the rare sight of a machine being diagnosed by sound alone. Well, Ethan demanded, crossing his arms. What's your expert diagnosis, boss? Jamal stood up, brushing metal dust off his hands. Worn cam follower in the pump assembly. Probably been developing for months, but you wouldn't notice it until the wear pattern got severe enough to affect the timing sequence. The 4 technicians stared at him. Lisa flipped through her technical manual, while Tom pulled out his phone to cross-reference something online. Lisa looked up from her manual with surprise. That's actually a very specific diagnosis, and the symptoms match perfectly. How'd you know that just from listening? Mike asked, genuine curiosity replacing skepticism. Same way you learn to recognize when your car's engine sounds wrong, Jamal said. These machines talk to you if you know how to listen. They tell you when they're in pain, when they're working too hard, when something's about to break. For the first time since they'd been introduced, Ethan looked at Jamal with something approaching respect instead of resentment. So how do we fix it? Ethan asked. Very carefully, Jamal said. That pump assembly weighs about 400 pounds. And if we drop it, we'll be down for a week waiting for replacement parts from Germany. They spent the next 4 hours methodically disassembling the pump, with Jamal guiding the process but letting each team member contribute their expertise. Tom had the steadiest hands for delicate work. Mike understood the hydraulic systems better than the people who designed them. Lisa kept meticulous notes that would be invaluable for future repairs, and Ethan, despite his initial hostility, knew shortcuts and tricks that saved both time and effort.
When they finally exposed the cam follower, it was obviously worn beyond any acceptable tolerance. The metal surface that should have been smooth as glass was pitted and scored, causing the irregular timing that had created the telltale clicking sound. Well, I'll be damned, Ethan said, examining the part with the respect of a craftsman for good diagnosis. You called that one exactly right. Experience, Jamal said simply. Same failure mode I've seen before, just in a different application. How long for a replacement part? David asked, appearing at Jamal's shoulder. He'd been watching the repair process from a distance, and Jamal could see approval in his expression. 2 days if we order through normal channels, Lisa said, consulting her supplier database on her tablet. But I might be able to find one locally if we're willing to pay premium pricing. Do it, Jamal said without hesitation. Downtime costs more than expedited shipping. Ethan nodded approvingly. Smart thinking. I like a supervisor who understands the business side.
As they cleaned up their tools and prepared for lunch break, Jamal felt something he hadn't experienced in months, the deep satisfaction of doing work he was genuinely good at, surrounded by people who were beginning to respect his competence rather than tolerate his presence. It wasn't charity, it wasn't sympathy, it was just a job earned through skill and maintained through results. For the first time since Sarah's death, Jamal Brooks felt like himself again. The replacement cam follower arrived Wednesday morning, 18 hours ahead of schedule. Lisa had worked her magic with suppliers, finding a parts dealer in Birmingham willing to drive the component down overnight for an extra $100, a cost that David Chen approved without hesitation when he calculated the savings in downtime. Jamal arrived at the plant at 6:30 a.m. to find Ethan already there, coffee steaming in one hand while he examined the new part under the harsh fluorescent lights of the maintenance bay. "Clean machining," Ethan said without looking up. "Proper tolerances, good surface finish. This should run like a Swiss watch once we get it installed." "You're here early," Jamal observed, pouring himself coffee from the pot that someone had started. "Couldn't sleep." Ethan set down the part and faced Jamal directly. "Look, I owe you an apology for Monday. I wasn't at my best." Jamal studied the older man's face. The permanent scowl had been replaced by something more complicated, not quite friendship but a grudging professional respect. "No apology needed," Jamal said. "I've been where you are, passed over for promotion, watching someone else get a job you thought should be yours. It stings." "Yeah, well," Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with emotional honesty. "Doesn't excuse poor behavior. You know your business, that's obvious. The way you diagnosed that cam follower issue, I've been doing this for 15 years, and I wouldn't have caught that until we had the whole assembly torn apart. Different experience, that's all. I've seen that particular failure mode before." "Where?" "Peterson's shop. Had an old Chevy come in with similar symptoms. Took me 3 days to figure out it was a worn cam lobe causing irregular valve timing. Same principle, different application." Ethan nodded slowly, and Jamal could see him filing away the information. "Peterson's. I heard that was a good shop, real old-school craftsmanship. Jim Peterson taught me that every machine has its own personality," Jamal said. "Each one has its own way of telling you what's wrong. You just have to learn the language." By 7 a.m. the rest of the team had arrived, along with David Chen and a cluster of production supervisors who were anxious to get their line running again. The hydraulic press had been down for 3 days now, costing the company thousands of dollars in lost productivity with each passing hour. "How long for the repair?" David asked, his tone neutral but his eyes betraying concern. 2 hours if everything goes according to plan," Jamal said. 4 if we run into complications." "What kind of complications?" "Seized bolts, misaligned housings, cross-threaded connections. The usual suspects when you're working with equipment this old and this critical." David nodded grimly. "Keep me posted. Corporate is breathing down my neck about these downtime numbers." The repair went smoothly, almost suspiciously so. Ethan and Tom handled the heavy lifting with practiced efficiency, using the overhead crane to position the pump assembly, while Mike monitored hydraulic pressures with the attention of a surgeon watching vital signs. Lisa documented each step of the process with photographs and detailed notes that would be invaluable for future maintenance. Jamal supervised but didn't micromanage, offering guidance when needed, but mostly letting his team demonstrate the competence that had kept the plant running during the months without proper supervision. When they finally powered up the machine for testing, the difference was immediately obvious. The irregular clicking was gone, replaced by the smooth rhythmic pulse of properly functioning equipment. The sound was almost musical, precision engineering performing exactly as designed. "Listen to that purr," Mike said with genuine satisfaction. "Sounds like a machine half its age." A crowd had gathered to watch the test run. Production workers, floor supervisors, even a few people from the administrative offices who rarely ventured onto the factory floor. In a manufacturing environment, a successful major repair was entertainment, especially when it meant getting back to full production capacity. "Run it through a complete cycle," Jamal instructed. "I want to make sure everything's functioning properly before we hand it back to production." The press ran through its entire operational sequence flawlessly: material intake, positioning, compression, extraction, reset. The transmission housing it produced was dimensionally perfect, meeting every specification with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. "Beautiful work," said Janet Martinez, the production supervisor responsible for this line. "How long has it been since we've seen this machine run this smoothly?" "Too long," David said, appearing at Jamal's elbow with obvious relief. "Outstanding work, team, all of you." As the crowd dispersed and normal operations resumed, Jamal found himself alone with his maintenance crew for the first time since Monday. The successful repair had changed something fundamental in their dynamic. The initial wariness was gone, replaced by the easy camaraderie that came from shared competence and mutual respect. "So what's next, boss?" Tom asked, wiping his hands on a clean shop rag. Jamal looked around the maintenance bay with the critical eye of someone who'd learned to see problems before they became crises. A slight vibration in the air compressor that most people would ignore. Oil stains beneath the secondary hydraulic unit that suggested a slow leak developing. The way one of the overhead lights flickered occasionally, indicating a loose connection that could fail at the worst possible moment. "Preventive maintenance audit," he said. "We're going to go through every machine in this plant and identify potential problems before they become actual problems." "That's going to take weeks," Lisa said, but she sounded excited rather than daunted by the prospect. "Better than explaining to David why we lost a week of production because something failed catastrophically," Ethan pointed out. "Exactly. And while we're at it, we're going to update the maintenance logs completely. I want to know the service history of every piece of equipment, when it was last serviced, what parts were replaced, what problems we've encountered before." Mike pulled out his tablet and started making notes. "I can set up a digital tracking system, link it to the work order database so we can identify patterns and predict failure points." "Good thinking. Lisa, I want you to research failure modes for each type of machine we maintain. Build a comprehensive diagnostic guide so we can train production staff to recognize early warning signs." "Already on it," Lisa said, reaching for her laptop. "Tom, you're our precision specialist. I want you to develop calibration schedules for all our measuring equipment. If we're going to prevent problems, we need to make sure we're measuring everything accurately." "Makes sense," Tom nodded. "And Ethan," Jamal turned to the senior technician, "I want you to mentor this entire process. You know these machines better than anyone, and your experience is going to be crucial for making this work." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, surprise, maybe even pleasure at being asked to lead rather than simply follow orders. "You sure about that? I'm not exactly management material." "I'm not asking you to be management. I'm asking you to share what you know so we can all get better at our jobs." Over the following weeks, the maintenance team transformed from a group of individual technicians into a cohesive unit with a shared mission. They developed systems, created protocols, and most importantly, they began preventing problems instead of just reacting to them. The change didn't go unnoticed. "Downtime is down 37% since you started," David told Jamal during their weekly meeting 3 weeks later. "Production efficiency is up, maintenance costs are actually down despite the increased activity, and the floor supervisors are singing your praises." "Good team," Jamal said simply. "They just needed direction and permission to do their jobs properly." "Mrs. Kane is more than impressed," David continued. "She's been watching the numbers closely, and she wanted me to tell you that you're exceeding expectations by a significant margin." Jamal felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction. It had been a long time since anyone had told him he was exceeding expectations at anything. "There is one thing," David said, his tone becoming more serious. "We've got a developing situation with Machine 7, the big stamping press that produces our high-volume transmission cases." Jamal knew the machine David was referring to. It was the plant's most critical piece of equipment, a massive hydraulic press that could shape metal with incredible precision, but was also incredibly complex and expensive to repair. More importantly, it was responsible for nearly 40% of their total production volume. What kind of situation? Intermittent quality issues. Some of the cases are coming out slightly out of specification, not enough to fail quality control outright, but enough to make our biggest customer nervous. Engineering thinks it might be a maintenance issue, but they can't pinpoint the cause. Jamal had been expecting this conversation. During his preventive maintenance audits, he'd noticed subtle irregularities in Machine 7's operation, vibrations that were technically within acceptable parameters, but felt wrong to his experienced hands, sounds that were normal but somehow different. "I'll take a look," he said. "There's more," David continued, and now his voice carried real concern. "The customer is sending their quality assurance manager down Friday to inspect our entire operation. If they're not satisfied with what they see, we could lose the contract." The stakes crystallized in Jamal's mind. Losing their biggest customer would mean layoffs, reduced hours, possibly even plant closure. He thought about his team, about the production workers who'd accepted him as one of their own, about the future he was building for Naomi. "I'll figure it out," he said, hoping he wasn't making a promise he couldn't keep. Thursday afternoon found Jamal standing in front of Machine 7 with his entire maintenance team, studying the massive press like generals planning a crucial battle. The machine dominated the factory floor, 30 feet long, 15 feet high, with hydraulic cylinders the size of telephone poles and a control system that looked like something from a space program. "Talk to me," he said. "What do we know?" "Quality reports show dimensional variations starting about 3 weeks ago," Lisa said, consulting her tablet. "Nothing dramatic, we're talking about thousandths of an inch, but consistent enough to establish a pattern. Hydraulic pressures are all within specification," Mike added. "I've been monitoring them continuously for the past week. Tooling looks perfect," Tom reported. "Dies are properly aligned, wear patterns are completely normal. Control system is functioning flawlessly," Ethan concluded. "All sensors reading correctly, timing sequences are precise to the millisecond." Jamal walked slowly around the machine, running his hands along the massive frame, listening to the sounds it made during its 45-second operating cycle. Each cycle was worth about $15 in finished product, and over the course of a shift, this single machine generated nearly $12,000 in revenue. The pressure was enormous, and something was definitely wrong. "Shut it down," he said finally. "Shut it down." Ethan looked genuinely surprised. "Jamal, we're still technically within quality tolerances. If we shut this thing down without a clear diagnosis and lose production time, if we don't shut it down and figure out what's wrong, we lose the customer." Jamal interrupted, "And then production time won't matter because we won't have any production to worry about." The factory floor seemed to hold its breath as Machine 7 powered down for the first time in 3 weeks. Workers gathered at a respectful distance, their faces tense with the knowledge that their jobs might depend on what happened next. "Ethan, I want you to examine the primary hydraulic assembly down to the last bolt. Mike, check every pressure sensor and flow valve in the entire system. Tom, inspect every die and fixture under magnification, look for wear patterns, stress fractures, anything that might affect dimensional accuracy. Lisa, pull up the maintenance logs for the past 6 months. I want to know every adjustment, every replacement, every modification that's been made to this machine." "What are you going to do?" David asked, appearing beside them with barely controlled anxiety. "I'm going to listen," Jamal said, pressing his ear against the machine's massive frame. "This machine has been trying to tell us something for weeks, we just haven't been speaking the same language." For the next 5 hours, they systematically dismantled Machine 7 with the methodical precision of archaeologists excavating a priceless artifact. Every component was examined, tested, measured, and documented. Hydraulic fluid was analyzed for contamination, electrical connections were tested for resistance, mechanical tolerances were verified with instruments accurate to millionths of an inch, and they found absolutely nothing wrong. "I don't understand it," Mike said, staring at his pressure readings with genuine confusion. "Every single parameter is perfect." "Same here," Tom reported, his voice tight with frustration. "The tooling is in better condition than when it was installed. Control system diagnostics show 0 errors," Ethan added, and Jamal could hear the edge of panic creeping into his voice. "Everything is functioning exactly as designed." Jamal stood in the center of the partially disassembled machine, surrounded by components and testing equipment, and the growing possibility that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. Maybe the quality issues were just normal manufacturing variation. Maybe he'd shut down the plant's most critical machine, based on nothing more than intuition and stubbornness. Then he heard it. It was barely perceptible, a tiny vibration that transmitted through the machine's frame, only during the compression phase of the cycle. so subtle that it was nearly lost in the ambient noise of the factory, but definitely there once you knew how to feel for it. "Start her up," he said suddenly. "But we haven't found," Ethan began. "Start her up, just for one cycle." The machine rumbled to life, and Jamal pressed his hands against different points on the massive frame, tracking the source of that almost imperceptible vibration like a doctor feeling for an irregular pulse. It wasn't coming from the hydraulics, not from the electrical systems, not from the tooling or the control mechanisms. It was coming from below, from the foundation itself. "Everybody step back," Jamal said, his voice sharp with sudden understanding. "Away from the machine." "Now, what is it?" David demanded, alarm clear in his voice. "Foundation settlement," Jamal said grimly. "The concrete pad is shifting. Not much, probably less than a 1/16 of an inch, but enough to throw off the machine's alignment by microscopic amounts." Lisa was already pulling up information on her tablet. Foundation settlement would cause gradual changes in dimensional accuracy as the machine's geometry shifted over time, she read, and it would be nearly impossible to detect without specialized surveying equipment. "Son of a bitch," Ethan breathed. "That would explain everything. The timing, the gradual nature of the problem, why all our diagnostics came back normal." "How do we fix it?" David asked. Jamal looked at the massive machine, thinking about the complexity of leveling a 30-ton press while maintaining tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. "Very carefully," he said, "and probably not before that customer inspection tomorrow." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Without Machine 7 running at full capacity, they couldn't meet their production commitments. And if the customer wasn't satisfied with their quality assurance measures, the contract would be gone regardless of what they eventually fixed. Unless, Jamal said slowly, an idea forming that was either brilliant or completely insane. "Ethan, how precisely can you adjust the die positioning?" "Pretty precisely." "Why?" "Because if we can't fix the foundation overnight, maybe we can compensate for it. Adjust the tooling to account for the machine's new geometry." It was an audacious proposition, making modifications based on theoretical calculations rather than proven engineering data. But it was their only chance of keeping the customer satisfied while they arranged for proper foundation repairs. "Let's do it," David said without hesitation. "What do you need?" "Time, precision measuring equipment, and more luck than any of us deserve," Jamal replied. They worked through the night, making microscopic adjustments to die positions and testing the results with sample parts that were measured and remeasured until the numbers made their eyes water. By 6 a.m., Machine 7 was running again, producing transmission cases that met every single quality specification. When the customer's quality assurance manager arrived at 9 a.m., she found a production line operating at peak efficiency, supported by a maintenance team that could explain every aspect of their quality control procedures with the confidence of people who truly understood their equipment. "Impressive," she said after completing her inspection. "This is exactly the kind of proactive maintenance philosophy we want to see from our suppliers. Your attention to detail and systematic approach to problem solving gives us confidence in your long-term reliability." After she left with renewed contract commitments and expanded production targets, David found Jamal in the maintenance bay, quietly updating documentation like it was just another day at the office. "How did you know?" David asked. "About the foundation." Jamal looked up from his paperwork, exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "Sometimes the machine tells you what's wrong if you know how to listen. You just have to be willing to hear what it's actually saying, instead of what you expect it to say." "Mrs. Kane is going to want to hear about this personally," David said. "What you did here, that didn't just save a contract, that saved jobs, maybe even saved the plant." "Team effort," Jamal said simply. "I couldn't have done any of it without Tom, Mike, Lisa, and especially Ethan." But David was already walking away, phone pressed to his ear, undoubtedly calling Victoria Kane to report that her faith in Jamal Brooks had been justified in ways none of them could have predicted. That evening, as Jamal walked out of the plant after the most challenging and rewarding day he'd had since before Sarah got sick, his phone buzzed with a text message. "Heard about today, exceptional work, we need to talk." VK Jamal smiled and put the phone away without responding immediately. For the first time in years, he had something to look forward to beyond just surviving until tomorrow. He had work that mattered, colleagues who respected him, and the beginning of a future that felt solid enough to build dreams on. The sun was setting over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of gold and possibility, and for once, Jamal Brooks felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 months later, Jamal stood in the living room of their new apartment, watching Naomi arrange her books on shelves that were actually attached to walls that belonged to them. Riverside Commons wasn't fancy, but it was clean and safe, with a playground where children laughed instead of worried, and neighbors who worked regular jobs and said hello in the hallways. "Daddy, look," Naomi called from her bedroom, her own bedroom, with a window that looked out over the courtyard where kids rode bikes and played games. "I can see the library from here, we can walk there whenever we want." Jamal smiled, feeling the weight of keys in his pocket. Real keys to a real apartment paid for with real paychecks from work that challenged him and respected him in equal measure. The maintenance team at Kane Industries had become more than colleagues, they'd become friends, people who trusted his judgment and followed his lead, not because they had to, but because they'd seen what happened when they worked together. His phone rang. Victoria Kane, calling on a Saturday afternoon. "Jamal, I hope I'm not interrupting your weekend." "Not at all, Mrs. Kane, just settling into our new place." "Wonderful, that's actually part of why I'm calling. I have a proposition I'd like to discuss with you. Are you free for lunch Monday?" Jamal felt that familiar flutter of anxiety that came with unexpected opportunities. In his experience, propositions from wealthy people usually came with complications that seemed simple at first, but turned complicated later. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that's better discussed in person. Trust me, you're going to want to hear this." Monday's lunch meeting was at a restaurant that required reservations and had cloth napkins, the kind of place where Jamal had looked up the dress code online to make sure his best shirt and tie would be appropriate. He arrived 15 minutes early, and spent the time in his car, trying to calm nerves that felt both familiar and foreign. Victoria was already seated when he arrived, at a corner table with excellent lighting and enough privacy for serious conversation. She looked up as he approached, and her smile seemed genuine rather than merely professional. "Jamal, you look well. The new apartment must be agreeing with you." "It's a big change," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Naomi loves having her own room. First time in her life she's had space that's entirely hers." They ordered. Victoria chose the salmon, Jamal selected the chicken, and made polite conversation about the plant, about Naomi's adjustment to her new school, about the foundation repairs on Machine 7 that had been completed ahead of schedule and under budget. But Jamal could sense an undercurrent of purpose beneath the casual conversation, could feel Victoria building towards something important. Finally, over coffee and dessert that Jamal was too nervous to touch, she got to the point. "I have an opportunity I'd like to discuss with you," she said. "I'm planning to open a new facility, smaller than East Atlanta, more specialized. We'll be manufacturing precision components for electric vehicle manufacturers, cutting-edge technology, extremely demanding quality standards." Jamal nodded, wondering where this was heading but afraid to hope too hard. "I need someone to design and manage the entire maintenance operation from the ground up. Someone who understands both the technical requirements and the human elements of building a successful team from nothing." The implication hung in the air between them like a bridge he wasn't sure he was ready to cross. "You're offering me the position. I'm offering you more than a position. I'm offering you a partnership, 20% equity in the new facility, plus salary and full benefits. The equity vests over 5 years. If you stay and help build this into a successful operation, you'll own a significant piece of something valuable. If the plant succeeds, you succeed with it. If it grows, you grow with it." Jamal felt the world shift around him. 20% equity wasn't just a job, it was ownership, legacy, the kind of opportunity that could change everything for Naomi's future and the generations that might follow. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why me?" Victoria leaned forward, her expression intensely serious. "Because in 3 months you've transformed the maintenance operation at East Atlanta from a reactive crisis management system into a proactive efficiency engine that's setting new standards for the entire industry. because you diagnosed a foundation settlement issue that 6 consulting engineers had missed, because you understand that maintaining machines isn't just about technical knowledge, it's about building teams and systems and cultures that work. She paused, her voice becoming softer but no less intense, and because that night in the rain, you reminded me that there are still people in the world who do the right thing simply because it's right. That kind of character is rare in business, and it's exactly what I need in someone I'm going to trust with building the future. But I need to know you're committed long term. This isn't charity, it's an investment in someone I believe can help me create something extraordinary. Jamal stared at her, trying to process what she was offering: partnership, ownership, the chance to build something from the ground up, instead of just maintaining what someone else had created. What would it involve? Everything. Hiring and training the maintenance staff, designing maintenance protocols from scratch, working with engineers to ensure our equipment meets quality standards that don't even exist yet. Victoria smiled. Think you can handle building something that's never been built before? Jamal thought about Naomi, safely asleep in her own bed in their own apartment, about the team at East Atlanta, who'd followed his lead and trusted his judgment, about the future he was building one good decision at a time, one challenge overcome at a time. Then he thought about the man he'd been before life knocked him down, ambitious, confident, full of dreams that had seemed achievable until they weren't. Maybe that man was still there, just waiting for the right opportunity to prove he'd never really been gone. When do we start? He said. Victoria's smile could have powered the entire restaurant. Welcome to Kane Brooks Manufacturing, partner. As they shook hands across the table, Jamal felt something fundamental shift inside him. Not just hope this time, but certainty. He was going to make this work. He was going to build something lasting and meaningful, something that would give Naomi opportunities he'd never dreamed of having. That evening, he sat on the couch in their living room, a real couch, purchased with money he'd earned through work that mattered, while Naomi showed him the drawing she'd made at school. It was a factory with smokestacks and loading docks, and 2 stick figures standing in front wearing hard hats and smiling. That's our factory, Daddy, she said proudly. The one we're going to build together. Jamal looked at the drawing, at the careful way she'd colored inside the lines, at the absolute confidence in every crayon stroke. How did you know about the factory? He asked. I heard you talking to Miss Victoria on the phone. Are we really going to build something together? We're going to try, baby girl. We're going to try to build something really special. Outside their window, the lights of Atlanta stretched toward the horizon, each one representing someone's dreams, someone's struggles, someone's hope for tomorrow. For the first time in years, Jamal Brooks believed his dreams were among them, not just surviving now, but shining bright enough to light the way forward for his daughter, and maybe even for other people who needed to believe that second chances were possible. The storm was over, the sun had returned, just like he'd promised Naomi it would, and tomorrow was going to be the beginning of something beautiful.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.